What if the man you built the empire you funded in secret was given to the other woman? We're not talking about a simple affair. We're talking about a multi-million-dollar corporation, a CEO title, and a 9-month secret that's about to explode. He publicly crowned his mistress, thinking his quiet wife would just disappear. But he underestimated her. He forgot one crucial detail. She had the receipts. Every last one. Get ready for a story of betrayal so deep and a comeback so stunning, it will leave you breathless. The champagne tasted like ash in Alara's mouth. From her position in the shadow of a marble pillar, she watched her husband, Adrian Sterling, command the room. He was a supernova in a bespoke Tom Ford suit, his charisma a gravitational force pulling everyone into his orbit. Tonight was the apex of his career, the 10th anniversary gala of Aura Innovations, the tech empire he had built from the ground up. Or so everyone thought. The grand ballroom of the Saint, Regis Singapore, was a sea of glittering opulence. Crystal chandeliers dripped diamonds of light onto the city's elite, the air thick with the scent of expensive perfume and the low hum of self-congratulation. Alara felt a familiar pang of dislocation, a feeling that had become her constant companion in Adrian's world. She was the ghost at the feast, the quiet, unassuming wife of a titan. Her simple, elegant navy blue gown felt like a costume, a stark contrast to the flamboyant designer creations that adorned the other women. She ran a protective hand over her belly, a secret she had been cherishing for 3 months, a fragile joy she planned to share with Adrian tonight. It was meant to be the perfect moment, a new beginning to mend the cracks that had begun to appear in their marriage. The late nights he called work, the scent of an unfamiliar perfume on his shirts, the growing emotional chasm between them. She had convinced herself it was just the stress of his success. The baby would change everything. It would be their anchor. Ladies and gentlemen, friends, partners, Adrian's voice boomed from the stage, silencing the crowd. A spotlight found him sculpting his handsome face, making him look like a modern-day king. 10 years. A decade of breaking barriers, of dreaming bigger. Aura Innovations is more than a company. It's a testament to the power of relentless ambition. Alara's heart swelled with a complicated mix of pride and bitterness. His ambition. Yes, she knew it well. She had nurtured it, funded it, sacrificed for it. But no man is an island. Adrian continued, his gaze sweeping the room. Alara's heart skipped a beat, thinking foolishly that this was it, that he would finally acknowledge her, the silent partner who had made it all possible. Success is a team sport, and as we look to the next decade, Aura needs a new kind of leadership, a visionary who can take us to the stratosphere. He paused for dramatic effect. The air crackled with anticipation. "It is my immense honor," he declared, his voice ringing with false sincerity, "to announce the new Chief Executive Officer of Aura Innovations." He turned, extending a hand, not to the wings, not to a seasoned executive, but to the front row, to a woman who rose with the fluid grace of a panther. Isabella Rossi. A gasp rippled through the room. Isabella was a vision in crimson, a stark, fiery slash against the room's cool tones. Her beauty was audacious, her ambition an almost visible aura. She was the company's head of marketing, known for her aggressive tactics, and for being, as the whispers went, Adrian's closest confidant. As Isabella ascended the stage, her hand finding Adrian's, their fingers lacing together in a gesture of shocking intimacy, the floor seemed to fall away from beneath Alara. The champagne glass slipped from her numb fingers, shattering on the marble floor with a sound that was deafening only to her. No one else noticed. All eyes were on the golden couple, a portrait of power and passion. "Isabella is the future of this company," Adrian said, his eyes devouring her. "Her brilliance, her drive. She embodies the very spirit of Aura." Isabella leaned into the microphone, her voice a sultry purr. "Thank you, Adrian. I promise to lead this company with the same passion you have. We will be unstoppable." The word "we" was a dagger in Ilara's heart. It wasn't a corporate "we." It was personal, possessive. This wasn't a promotion. It was a coronation. The public crowning of his mistress. The room erupted in applause, a wave of sound that threatened to drown her. Ilara stood frozen, the shattered glass at her feet, a perfect metaphor for her life. The baby she carried felt impossibly heavy, a leaden weight of despair. The future she had so carefully planned, the reconciliation she had prayed for, had just been publicly executed. She saw it all with horrifying clarity. Now the late nights weren't about work. They were about Isabella. The faint, sweet perfume was hers. The emotional distance was a chasm he had carved out to make room for another woman. He hadn't just been cheating on her. He had been building a new life, a new future with someone else using her own money. Because Aura Innovations wasn't just his company, it was hers. The name on the incorporation documents was Adrian Sterling's. But the seed money, the critical $500,000 that had breathed life into his fledgling idea 10 years ago, had come from a trust fund her grandmother had left her. "For your security," Ilara, her grandmother, had written in a letter. "Invest it wisely, in something you believe in." She had believed in Adrian. He had come to her with stardust in his eyes and blueprints for a revolution. He was a brilliant engineer with no capital. She was a quiet librarian with a secret nest egg and a foolishly romantic heart. She had given him everything on one condition, that her involvement remained a secret. She hadn't wanted to be the rich wife who bankrolled her husband's hobby. She wanted him to shine on his own for the world to see his genius. She had wanted to be the wind beneath his wings, not the gilded cage. What a fool she had been. He hadn't just flown. He had soared away, leaving her grounded, broken, and now publicly humiliated. As Adrian and Isabella beamed under the spotlight, their hands clasped in victory, a cold, hard resolve began to form in the ruins of Ilara's heart. The shock gave way to a slow, burning rage. The quiet, unassuming wife was gone, shattered on the floor with the champagne flute. In her place, a woman with nothing left to lose was being born. He thought she was weak. He thought she would crumble. He thought he could discard her like a forgotten relic. He had forgotten the most important thing. She wasn't just the wind beneath his wings. She was the one who had bought the damn plane. And she had the receipts to prove it. Ilara turned her back straight and walked away from the celebration, her steps sure and steady. The war had just been declared, and she, the silent, invisible founder of Aura Innovations, was coming to collect. The silence of their sprawling penthouse on Orchard Road was a physical blow. Hours ago it had been a home. Now it was a museum of a dead marriage, filled with artifacts of a shared life that felt like a lie. Ilara walked through the rooms, her bare feet cold on the Italian marble floors. Every object was a memory now tainted. The abstract painting they'd bought in Bali on their honeymoon, the collection of first-edition novels she'd so lovingly curated, the sleek, minimalist furniture that Adrian had insisted upon. It all felt alien, like a movie set she had wandered onto by mistake. She didn't cry, The pain was too deep, too fundamental for tears. It was a tectonic shift in the landscape of her reality. She had spent the last decade pouring herself into the vessel of Adrian's life, making his dreams her own, shrinking herself so he could be larger than life. And for what? To be so easily and brutally replaced. In the master bedroom, a crimson dress was draped carelessly over a chaise lounge. Isabella's. The scent of her perfume, the one Elara could never place, clung to the air, a final suffocating insult. He hadn't even had the decency to hide his betrayal. He had brought his mistress into their bed, into their home, into her life. That's when the rage, a white-hot, purifying fire, finally consumed the numbness. She walked to Adrian's custom-built walk-in closet, a temple to his vanity. Suits from Savile Row, shoes from Milan, watches from Geneva. The trappings of a success she had financed. With a strength she didn't know she possessed, she pulled the suits from their hangers, letting them fall to the floor in a heap of expensive fabric. She swept the rows of gleaming watches and cufflinks into a dustbin. It was a petty act, yes, but it was a start. It was an action. And action was the only antidote to the paralysis of despair. Her own reflection in the closet's full-length mirror caught her eye. She saw a pale, drawn woman with haunted eyes. But beneath the shock there was something new, a glint of steel. The quiet librarian was gone. The accommodating wife was a ghost. The woman looking back at her was a fighter. She had a child to protect now. Not just a legacy. This baby, their baby, would not be born into a world where its father was a fraud and its mother a doormat. She retreated to her study, the one room in the penthouse that was truly hers. It was a sanctuary of old books, warm wood, and the faint, comforting scent of paper and leather. This was where she had made the decision that had sealed her fate 10 years ago. Flashback 10 years ago. Adrian, then a 26-year-old dreamer, with eyes that burned with ambition, had spread his blueprints across her small apartment floor. He spoke for hours, his voice electric with passion, describing an algorithm that could revolutionize data security. He had the genius, the vision, the drive. He lacked only one thing: money. Elara, he had said, taking her hands. His were calloused from hours spent soldering circuit boards. Hers were soft from turning pages. This could change the world. It could change our world. But no one will take a chance on me. The venture capitalists want a working prototype, and I can't build it out of my garage. She had just received the letter from the solicitor's office. Her grandmother, a shrewd and independent woman, had left her a small fortune, a trust fund valued at just over $500,000. It was a secret she had told no one, not even Adrian. It was her safety net, her independence. Looking into his desperate, brilliant eyes, she had seen their future. A future where he was a giant, and she was the one who had given him the leverage to move the world. "I have some money," she'd said quietly, the words feeling momentous. "From my grandmother." He'd been stunned. When she told him the amount, he looked at her as if she had hung the moon in the sky. He promised her the world, promised her equity, a co-founder title, a partnership in every sense of the word. But she had refused. "No, Adrian," she'd insisted. "I want this to be yours. I don't want your success to have an asterisk next to it. I don't want people to whisper that you only made it because your wife bought your company for you. Let me be your silent partner. The official documents will all be in your name. But we'll have our own agreement, a private one, just between us." She had believed in the sanctity of that promise. So she'd had her lawyer, a cautious old family friend named Mr. Henderson draft a simple but binding document, a loan agreement. It wasn't for a loan in the traditional sense. It was a convertible note. It stipulated that the $500,000 was an investment that could at her discretion be converted into a 51% controlling stake in the company Aura Innovations upon its incorporation. It was her ultimate security, a kill switch if he ever betrayed her trust. Adrian had signed it without hesitation, laughing it off as a formality. As if I would ever betray you, Elara. We're in this together. Forever. He had sealed the promise with a kiss, and she had placed the signed document, along with the wire transfer confirmation from her Swiss bank account, to his into a fireproof safe. The safe was now tucked away in a vault at a private bank, a sleeping dragon, awaiting its moment to wake. Present day. The memory was a spur driving her forward. He had forgotten their agreement, or worse, he had assumed she would never use it. He had mistaken her quietness for weakness, her love for foolishness. Her first call was to Mr. Henderson's firm. The kindly old lawyer had since retired, but she was put through to his successor, a woman whose nameplate seemed to promise exactly what Elara needed, Ms. Anya Sharma. Her voice on the phone was sharp, precise, and devoid of the cloying sympathy Elara couldn't bear. Mr. Sterling's wife, Anya, said her tone professional, but with an undercurrent of curiosity. The news of Isabella's promotion was already making ripples. "How can I help you, Mrs. Sterling?" "First," Elara said, her own voice steady and clear, "please call me Elara. Second, I need to retrieve a document from my private vault. It's a convertible note from 10 years ago. And third, I need to know the fastest way to liquidate a CEO and seize control of a multi-million-dollar corporation." There was a moment of stunned silence on the other end of the line, then a low chuckle. "Elara Ms. Sharma said, and now her voice held a note of genuine admiration. "I think you and I are going to get along just fine. When can you be at my office?" As she hung up, Elara felt the first stirrings of something she hadn't felt in years. Power. It wasn't the ostentatious power Adrian wielded, but a quiet, deep-seated strength that came from knowing the truth. Her phone buzzed. It was Adrian. The first of what she knew would be many calls and texts. She looked at his name on the screen, then declined the call without a second thought. She blocked his number, then Isabella's. The lines of communication were closed. The next time he heard from her, it would not be as his wife. It would be through her lawyer. She walked to the window, looking out at the glittering Singapore skyline. It was a city built on commerce, on contracts, on the unshakable reality of numbers in a ledger. He had played a game of hearts, and he had cheated. She was about to change the game to one of finance and law, and in that arena she held the winning hand. The proof was locked away, waiting. The proof that she, Elara Sterling, the invisible wife, didn't just fund the company. She owned it. Anya Sharma's office was a stark contrast to the opulent world Elara was used to. Located in a heritage shop house on An Siang Hill, it was a space of clean lines, modern art, and an air of formidable efficiency. Anya herself was the embodiment of this aesthetic. Dressed in a sharply tailored pantsuit, her dark hair pulled back in a severe bun, she radiated an intensity that was both intimidating and deeply reassuring. She examined the 10-year-old document Elara had retrieved from the bank vault. Her sharp eyes scanned the clauses, her expression unreadable. The original wire transfer confirmation was laid out beside it. "This is airtight," Anya said. finally looking up at Elara. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact. A convertible note properly executed witnessed by your solicitor. The language is unequivocal. At your discretion, the $500,000 investment converts to a 51% controlling stake. He signed it. It's a ticking time bomb, and he's forgotten he's been sleeping on it for a decade. He didn't forget. Elara said, her voice low. He just never believed I would press the button. Well, he's in for a rude awakening, Anya replied, a grim smile touching her lips. The first step is to formally notify him of your intent to exercise the conversion. We'll serve him with a demand letter. It will be couriered to his office tomorrow morning. It will inform him that as of the receipt of the letter, you are the majority shareholder of Aura Innovations, and that any and all significant corporate decisions, such as, say, appointing a new CEO, are null and void without your approval. The thought of Adrian's face when he read that letter sent a jolt of vindictive pleasure through Elara, followed immediately by a wave of nausea. The baby inside her kicked a tiny, fluttering reminder of the innocent life caught in this crossfire. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about securing her child's future. A future built on truth, not on a lie funded by a philandering father. What will he do? Elara asked. He'll fight, Anya said, without hesitation. He'll claim duress, or that it was a personal loan that you're misrepresenting. He'll try to paint you as a scorned wife looking for revenge. His lawyers will try to bury us in motions and stall. But they don't have this. She tapped the signed document. This is the ace. They can bluster all they want, but we have the proof. The demand letter landed on Adrian's desk the next morning, like a grenade. Adrian, according to his frantic secretary, who still held a soft spot for Elara, and called her in a panic, went ballistic. He swept his desk clean in a volcanic eruption of fury, the sound of smashing glass and splintered wood echoing through the executive suite. He immediately called his legal team a pack of corporate sharks from a top-tier firm. His counter-offensive was swift and brutal. Within 48 hours, Anya received a response. It was a letter dripping with legalistic contempt, dismissing Elara's claim as a frivolous and vindictive fantasy born of marital discord. They claimed the money had been a gift, a token of a wife's support for her husband's ambitions, and that the convertible note was a domestic document with no legal standing, a romantic notion that had been coerced out of him during a moment of emotional vulnerability. They also made a critical mistake. They offered a settlement, a generous one by most standards, a multi-million-dollar divorce package, the penthouse, a lavish alimony. It was a king's ransom to a discarded queen. They're scared, Anya said, her eyes gleaming as she read the offer. This isn't the response of a confident party. This is a bribe. They know we have them, and they're trying to buy our silence. They want you to take the money and go away quietly. He's trying to pay me off with my own money. Elara said, the audacity of it stealing her breath. Exactly. Which is why we're not taking it. Anya leaned forward. Now we play hardball. We file an injunction to freeze all major corporate activities. We demand a full financial audit and an emergency meeting of the board of directors. We are not asking for a seat at the table, Elara. We are here to inform them that you are the table. While the legal battle lines were being drawn, the personal war escalated. Adrian, unable to reach her by phone, began a campaign of psychological warfare. He sent extravagant bouquets of flowers to the service department Anya had insisted Elara move into for her security. The cards attached were filled with cloying, manipulative words. Don't do this, Elara. Think of what we had. This isn't you. Let's talk just the two of us." Then came Isabella. She appeared one afternoon at a cafe where Elara was meeting a friend. Dressed in a white power suit, she looked every inch the conquering CEO. She approached Elara's table, her smile a carefully calibrated mix of pity and condescension. "Elara, can we talk?" she began, not waiting for an answer. "I know you're hurt, but this legal action is unbecoming. It's making a private matter messy and public. Adrian is willing to be very generous. Don't let bitterness cloud your judgment." Elara looked up from her tea, her gaze calm and steady. "The only thing that's messy and public, Isabella, is your promotion. As for my judgment, it has never been clearer. You're sitting in my chair in my company, a company you seem to think you earned. You didn't earn it. You were gifted it by a man who doesn't have the authority to give it away. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a company to reclaim." Isabella's mask of civility cracked, revealing the raw ambition beneath. "You're a fool. You think a piece of paper from 10 years ago means anything. Adrian built this company. His sweat, his genius. You were just a bank, and banks get paid back. They don't get to own the enterprise. You'll be a laughing stock." "We'll see," Elara said, turning back to her friend, a clear dismissal. But the intimidation tactics grew darker. A private investigator started following her. Her laptop was hacked, a clumsy attempt to find any personal information that could be used against her. Anya's team traced the cyber attack back to an IP address linked to a subsidiary of Aura Innovations. "This is excellent," Anya declared, far from being intimidated. "They're breaking the law. Witness intimidation, illegal surveillance. They are creating a mountain of evidence against themselves. Keep your head up, Elara. They're losing, and they know it." The pressure was immense. The stress was a constant gnawing presence, and she worried about the baby. But with every underhanded move Adrian and Isabella made, her resolve hardened. This was no longer just about her. It was a fight for principle. The breakthrough came a week later. Anya's forensic accountants, who had been poring over Aura's financials, found something. A series of large, undocumented payments being funneled into a shell corporation registered in the Cayman Islands. The shell corporation was owned by one Isabella Rossi. She had been embezzling for years, siphoning off company funds for personal use, luxury cars, a condominium, a designer wardrobe that was now infamous. Adrian had either been complicit or so blinded by his affair that he had allowed his mistress to rob the company blind. "This is the kill shot," Anya said, her voice grim. "It's not just about your convertible note anymore. This is criminal fraud. With this, we don't just get the company. We can ruin them." Anya's strategy shifted. The emergency board meeting was scheduled. She prepared a presentation that would not only prove Elara's ownership, but also expose Isabella's systematic theft. The night before the meeting, Elara couldn't sleep. She stood on the balcony of her apartment. The city lights spread out before her like a carpet of fallen stars. She was terrified. Tomorrow, she would face the man she once loved, the woman who had destroyed her life, and a boardroom full of powerful men who saw her as nothing more than a disgruntled wife. She placed a hand on her now noticeably rounded belly. "We can do this," she whispered to the life inside her. "We have to." The storm was no longer gathering. It was about to break. And she would be the lightning. The boardroom at Aura Innovations was on the 50th floor, a glass-encased chamber in the sky designed to intimidate. It offered a panoramic view of the Singapore harbor, a vista of power and global commerce. Today, however, all eyes were turned inward, focused on the long, polished mahogany table where the future of $100 million company was about to be decided. Adrian sat at the head of the table, flanked by Isabella and a team of stone-faced lawyers. He looked haggard, the charismatic sheen replaced by a brittle fury. Isabella, in a severe black dress, projected an air of icy defiance, but a nervous tick in her jaw betrayed her anxiety. The other board members, a collection of grizzled, powerful men who had backed Adrian for years, looked on with expressions ranging from skepticism to outright hostility. The doors opened, and Elara walked in. A collective intake of breath seemed to suck the air out of the room. She had expected to be a ghost, an inconvenient memory. But the woman who entered was a stranger to them. Dressed in a custom-tailored maternity dress in a shade of deep emerald green, her hair styled in soft waves, she was poised and radiant. Her pregnancy was now undeniable, a visible testament to the life Adrian had discarded. She wasn't the mousy wife they remembered. She was a Madonna with a war plan. Beside her, Anya Sharma moved with the focused lethality of a panther. They took their seats directly opposite Adrian, a declaration of intent. "Thank you for joining us." Adrian began, his voice tight with barely suppressed rage. "Though I must protest this circus. Mrs. Sterling's claims are baseless, and this meeting is a waste of the board's valuable time. We have provided a more than generous settlement offer to resolve this unfortunate domestic issue." Anya smiled, a sharp, dangerous curving of her lips. "Mr. Sterling, let's be clear. We are not here to negotiate your divorce settlement. We are here to facilitate a peaceful transfer of power. My client, Elara Sterling, is the majority shareholder of this company. This isn't a domestic issue. It's a corporate governance issue." A murmur went through the board members. Adrian's lead counsel, a bulldog of a man named Marcus Thorne, scoffed, a ludicrous assertion based on a decade-old, emotionally charged piece of paper. "Mr. Sterling built this company with his own two hands. That is a convenient fiction." Anya countered, her voice cutting through the tension. "One we are here to correct." She nodded to her assistant, who dimmed the lights and turned on the large screen at the end of the room. The first slide was a high-resolution scan of the convertible note, Adrian's arrogant signature, clear for all to see. The second was the swift confirmation of the $500,000 wire transfer from Elara's trust fund account to Adrian's. As you can see, Anya narrated her tone cool and clinical. The seed capital for Aura Innovations was provided in its entirety by my client. This document, which your lawyers have so contemptuously dismissed, is a legally binding contract that gives her a 51% controlling stake. She is, and has always been, the silent founder. Adrian slammed his hand on the table. "This is an outrage. It was a loan between a husband and wife, a gesture of support, a gesture that you were legally bound to honor." Anya fired back, a fact you conveniently forgot when you decided to appoint your mistress as CEO of a company you don't control. The word mistress hung in the air, a grenade with the pin pulled. Isabella flinched as if struck. "But this is not just about ownership." Anya continued, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial hush. "This is about the gross mismanagement and criminal fraud that has been happening under Mr. Sterling's nose." The next slide appeared, showing a complex web of financial transactions. It detailed the flow of money from Aura's marketing budget into the Cayman Islands Shell Corporation. It showed invoices for non-existent marketing campaigns signed off by Isabella Rossi. The final slides were a devastating montage photos of Isabella's new Maserati land titles for her luxury condo credit card statements, detailing purchases at Gucci Prada and Cartier, all timed perfectly with the transfers. The boardroom was utterly silent. The board members who had been looking at Elara with disdain now turned their stunned, furious gazes on Isabella and Adrian. They weren't just investors. They were men who valued their reputations, and they were staring at a scandal that could tank the company's stock and land them all in a mess of regulatory investigations. Ms. Rosie Anya said, her voice soft but carrying deadly weight, has embezzled over $2 million from this company over the past 2 years. Mr. Sterling was either her willing accomplice or he is the most incompetent chairman in corporate history. Isabella finally broke. Lies. This is a fabrication, a desperate attempt by a pathetic, jealous woman to— Is this a fabrication? Ms. Rosianya interrupted, and a new image filled the screen. It was a close-up of a signature on one of the fraudulent invoices. Then next to it, a scan of Isabella's signature from her employment contract. They were identical. Our forensic handwriting expert is prepared to testify under oath. Checkmate. Isabella's face drained of all color. She looked at Adrian, her eyes wide with panic, pleading for him to save her. But Adrian was staring at Elara, truly seeing her for the first time in years. He wasn't seeing the quiet wife he had cheated on. He was seeing the architect of his ruin, the woman who had given him everything and was now taking it all back. The look in his eyes was not one of love or hate, but of pure, unadulterated shock. He had been so consumed by his own brilliance, he had never once considered hers. One of the oldest board members, a silver-haired patriarch named Mr. Chen, cleared his throat. His voice was heavy with gravitas. Adrian, Isabella, is this true? Adrian opened his mouth, but no words came out. His entire world, the empire built on a lie, was crumbling around him in real time. Elara spoke for the first time, her voice calm and strong, resonating with an authority no one in the room had ever heard from her. It is true, she said, her eyes locked on Adrian's. And it ends today. As the majority shareholder of Aura Innovations, I am exercising my rights. Effective immediately. Adrian Sterling is removed as chairman of the board. Isabella Rossi's appointment as CEO is rescinded, and she is terminated for cause. Security is waiting outside to escort you both from the building. She stood up, placing her hands on the table and leaning forward slightly. She was no longer hiding in the shadows. She was the power in the room. This company was founded on a dream, she said, her gaze sweeping across the stunned faces of the board. My dream. A dream of innovation, integrity, and honor. We will return to those values. I will be taking over as interim chairwoman. Our legal team will cooperate fully with the authorities to recover every dollar that was stolen. We will rebuild, and we will be stronger and more transparent than ever before. Adrian finally found his voice, a strangled whisper. Elara, you can't. Elara looked at the father of her unborn child, the man she had loved with all her heart, and felt a profound and cleansing sense of finality. I can, she said, her voice softening almost imperceptibly, a last echo of the woman she used to be. You just never bothered to look closely enough to see it. You saw a wife. You should have seen a founder. With that, she turned and walked out of the boardroom, leaving behind the wreckage of 2 lives and the stunned silence of a company that had just met its true owner. The reckoning was over, The rebuilding was about to begin. The heavy doors of the boardroom swung shut behind Alara, the sound echoing the finality of a gavel. She didn't look back. In the hallway, her legs threatened to give way, the adrenaline that had fueled her performance, giving way to a profound, bone-deep exhaustion. Anya was there instantly, a steadying hand on her arm. "You did it," Anya whispered, her usual professional composure cracking into a smile of pure, unadulterated triumph. "You were magnificent." "I feel—" Alara started, then stopped, unable to find the words. She felt hollowed out, and yet somehow fuller than she had ever been. From inside the boardroom, a commotion erupted. Raised voices, the scraping of chairs. Then the doors opened again. Two burly security guards men Alara had only ever seen as stone-faced sentinels at the building's entrance emerged. Between them, looking small and utterly defeated, was Adrian. His face was a mask of disbelief. His Tom Ford suit rumpled, his charismatic aura extinguished. His eyes found Alara's, and for a moment a torrent of emotions passed between them. A decade of love, a mountain of lies, and the vast, unbridgeable chasm of his betrayal. He opened his mouth to speak, but one of the guards gently propelled him forward. A moment later, Isabella followed. Her icy defiance had shattered into a million pieces. She was crying not with sorrow, but with the ugly, sputtering rage of a dethroned queen. Her mascara ran in black streaks down her face, a grotesque parody of her usual perfect makeup. When she saw Alara, her face contorted. "You will regret this," she shrieked, her voice echoing in the marble hall. "You think you've won? You've won nothing. A company you'll run into the ground. And a bastard child." The word hung in the air, vile and poisonous. Before Anya could step forward, Alara held up a hand, her gaze calm. She looked at Isabella, a woman she could have pitied, but now only saw as a casualty of her own greed. "The difference between you and me, Isabella," Alara said, her voice even, "is that I built this company. I built it for my family, and now I am taking it back for my child. You were just a temporary line item in the expense column. A very, very expensive mistake." Isabella lunged, but the second guard caught her arm easily. As they were escorted to the service elevator, the designated exit for the disgraced Alara, knew she was witnessing the true end. The boardroom door opened a third time. It was Mr. Chen, the senior board member. He approached Alara cautiously, his old eyes holding a newfound respect. "Chairwoman," he said, testing the title. It fit. "On behalf of the board, I want to apologize. We were blind. Your actions today were decisive. You have our full support." This was her first victory as a leader. Not just seizing power, but earning it. The days that followed were a blur of controlled chaos. Alara, with Anya constantly at her side, became the eye of the hurricane. The news of the corporate coup and the embezzlement scandal broke, sending shockwaves through Singapore's business community. But instead of hiding, Alara took control of the narrative. She authorized a press release that was brutally honest, detailing the leadership transition and the discovery of financial irregularities. It painted Aura Innovations not as a sinking ship, but as a company cleansing itself of corruption under a strong, ethical new leader. She held an all-hands meeting in the company auditorium. Standing before hundreds of anxious employees, her pregnancy now a symbol not of vulnerability, but of her fierce commitment to the future, she laid out her vision. "Aura was built on a dream of integrity," she told them. "We lost our way. I am here to find our way back. Your jobs are safe. Your work is valued. The era of secrets and lies is over. Today we begin the era of transparency and trust. She spent the following weeks in back-to-back meetings, immersing herself in the operational details she had only ever known from a distance. She discovered she had a natural aptitude for it, a librarian's love for order and detail combined with a founder's passion. She wasn't just Adrian's wife. She had been his first believer, and she understood the soul of the company better than anyone. Adrian tried to reach her, of course. Pathetic, pleading voicemails at first, then angry, threatening texts sent through his mother's phone. Elara never listened to them, never read them. She instructed Anya to handle all communication. The divorce proceedings were swift and brutal. With the evidence of both infidelity and his complicity in the fraud, he had no leverage. He was left with a fraction of his personal wealth, his reputation in tatters, a pariah in the world he had once ruled. 6 months later, Elara stood in her office, the former chairman's office now redecorated in warm woods, soft fabrics and shelves filled with books instead of self-congratulatory awards. The panoramic view of the harbor no longer felt intimidating. It felt like a promise. The company had stabilized. Under her leadership, Aura had not only survived the scandal, but was emerging stronger, leaner, and with a renewed sense of purpose. She ran a hand over her heavily pregnant belly, feeling a strong kick in response. On her desk, next to a stack of financial reports, was the first framed photo for the new office, a black and white ultrasound image of a tiny, perfect profile. A soft knock came at the door. It was Mr. Chen. "Chairwoman," he said with a warm smile. "The Q3 numbers are in. We're up 15%. Elara smiled back, a genuine, untroubled smile. "Thank you, Mr. Chen. That's a good start." After he left, she walked to the vast window, looking out at the city lights beginning to twinkle in the dusk. She had gone through the fire and emerged not scorched but forged. She had lost a husband, but found herself. The quiet wife, the silent partner, the ghost at the feast. They were all gone. In their place stood Elara, founder, chairwoman, mother. She was the architect of her own life, the master of her own empire, and the guardian of a new one just about to begin. The reckoning was over. Her reign was just beginning. 3 months later, the panoramic view from the 50th floor office was the same, but Elara's world had been fundamentally remade. The centerpiece of the room was no longer the imposing mahogany desk, but a sleek, modern bassinet tucked into a quiet corner. Inside, sound asleep, was Leo. Her son had been born 2 months prior, a healthy, beautiful boy with a tuft of dark hair, and to her private, complicated sorrow. Adrian's eyes. He was the son her life now orbited. Board meetings were scheduled around his feeding times. Late-night work sessions were now spent with a laptop in one hand and a baby monitor in the other. She had discovered a new kind of strength, a fierce, primal power that made her boardroom victory feel like a preliminary round. Aura Innovations was thriving. The story of its dramatic overhaul had become a case study in corporate ethics. Elara, the pregnant CEO, who had ousted her corrupt husband, was a media sensation, though she guarded her privacy fiercely. She was respected, admired, and even a little feared. It was a Tuesday afternoon when the past came knocking. Anya Sharma entered the office, her expression uncharacteristically grim. She closed the door softly behind her. "We have a problem," Anya said, her voice low. "It's Adrian." Elara's blood ran cold. She instinctively glanced at Leo, a protective instinct flaring. What now? Is he contesting the settlement? Worse, Anya said, placing a legal document on the desk. He's petitioning for paternity rights. He's demanding visitation. Elara stared at the document. The formal legal language, a violation of her new peaceful world. After months of silence, after being utterly vanquished here, he was again a ghost rattling his chains. He wants to see Leo Elara stated the words tasting like poison. He's framing it as a heartfelt plea from a repentant father. Anya explained, her tone laced with cynicism. He claims losing everything made him realize what's truly important. He's found a bulldog of a family lawyer who's painting you as a vindictive ex-wife, using your child as a pawn to punish him. The accusation was so vile, so far from the truth, that Elara felt a surge of white-hot rage. Every decision she had made was for Leo's protection, to build a stable, honest world for him, free from the toxic wreckage of his father's legacy. "He doesn't get to do this," she said, her voice trembling with fury. "He doesn't get to destroy our life and then demand a role in the new one I've built from the ashes. He doesn't get to touch my son." "Legally, he has a right to try," Anya said gently. "He is the biological father. A court will look unfavorably on a mother who completely denies access without cause." Without cause, Elara's laugh was sharp and humorless. He conspired to defraud his own company. He publicly humiliated me. He has shown no moral compass whatsoever. He is the cause. But as the days went on, the reality of the situation settled in. Anya's legal team prepared a robust defense, but the question haunted Elara's sleepless nights. What was best for Leo? Would her son one day resent her for keeping his father from him? Would the complete absence of a father leave a wound that she couldn't heal? She decided to meet him. One last time. Not in a boardroom or a lawyer's office, but in the neutral public space of the Singapore Botanic Gardens. He was already there, sitting on a bench near the Swan Lake, looking like a ghost of the man he once was. The bespoke suits were gone, replaced by simple, ill-fitting clothes. He had lost weight, and there were shadows under his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights of a different kind than hers. The supernova had collapsed into a dwarf star. He stood as she approached Leo, snug in a carrier against her chest. Adrian's eyes immediately fixed on the baby, and an expression of such raw, agonizing longing crossed his face that it momentarily stunned her. "Elara," he said, his voice raspy. "Thank you for coming." "I'm not here for you, Adrian," she said, her voice devoid of warmth. "I'm here for him." She didn't need to nod toward Leo. He was the entire reason for this meeting. "He's perfect," Adrian whispered, taking a half step forward before stopping himself. "He looks like you." "He has your eyes," she replied flatly. It was a fact, not a concession. For a long moment, they stood in silence, the sounds of the gardens, the chatter of tourists, the cry of a distant bird filling the space between them. "I know what you think of me," he began, his gaze falling to the ground. "And you're right. I was a fool. I was arrogant, and I was cruel. I lost myself, Elara, when I stood in that boardroom and watched you take everything I hated you. But after the hate, after the anger, there was nothing. Just a giant, empty hole where my life used to be. And in that emptiness, the only thing I could think about was him. My son." He looked up, and for the first time she didn't see the manipulative CEO or the cheating husband. She saw a broken man. "I'm not asking for your forgiveness," he said. "I don't deserve it. And I'm not asking for a place in your life. I just want a chance to have one in his. Let me be his father. Please." Elara looked from Adrian's desperate face to the sleeping baby on her chest. Her heart, which she had thought was permanently shielded, felt a painful twinge. This was the man she had once loved, the man with whom she had dreamed of building a family. That dream had become a nightmare, but the child was real. Her decision when it came was as swift and decisive as the one she had made in the boardroom. It was not born of pity or forgiveness, but of a cold, clear-eyed strategy for her son's future. "You will withdraw the court petition," she stated, her voice firm. "There will be no lawyers, no demands. Everything will be on my terms. You will see him once a month, for 1 hour, in my presence. You will not buy him gifts. You will not make promises you can't keep. You will not speak ill of me, and you will never ever discuss what happened between us. You will be a visitor in his life. And if you ever for 1 second step out of line, you will never see him again." Tears welled in Adrian's eyes, and he nodded, unable to speak. He understood. This wasn't a reconciliation. It was a probation. "Can I?" He whispered, his hand hovering in the air, wanting to touch his son. Elara looked down at Leo's peaceful face. After a long moment, she adjusted the carrier slightly, giving him a clear view. Adrian reached out a trembling finger and gently stroked his son's cheek. It was a moment of profound, heartbreaking connection, an echo of a life that could have been. Elara felt nothing. No spark of the old love, no satisfaction in his defeat. Just the heavy, resolute certainty of a queen protecting her heir. The past would always be there, an echo in the background of her life, but it no longer had any power over her. She had faced the ghost, and she had won. Again. That was the moment the tables didn't just turn, they shattered. Elara Sterling walked out of that boardroom, not as a victim, but as a victor, ready to build a new empire on the ashes of betrayal. Her story is a powerful reminder that the quietest people often have the most to say, and that true strength isn't about the noise you make, but the foundations you build. A gasp rippled through the gilded ballroom of the St. Regis Hanoi. All eyes were on the woman in crimson. Her hand still raised, her face a mask of triumph. Before her, the gentle, pregnant wife of billionaire mogul Marcus Thorne stumbled. A hand protectively clutching her swollen belly, the imprint of a slap blooming on her cheek. The city's elite watched breathless as the mistress, bold and unrepentant, declared her victory. But the real drama wasn't the public humiliation or the shattered illusion of a perfect marriage. The true bombshell was nestled deep inside the womb, a secret waiting to be revealed not by words, but by the frantic telling rhythm of a tiny, unborn heart. Isabella Thorne believed her life was a fairy tale. At 26, she was the wife of Marcus Thorne, a man whose name was synonymous with power in Southeast Asia's tech scene. Their love story was the stuff of legend, a whirlwind romance that saw a humble art curator marry into one of Hanoi's most influential families. Marcus was her everything, charming, attentive, and fiercely protective. He had given her a life beyond her wildest dreams, a sprawling penthouse overlooking West Lake, a wardrobe filled with bespoke creations from designers like Kong Tri, and a love that felt as solid as the ancient stones of the nearby Temple of Literature. Now 6 months pregnant with their first child, a son, Isabella felt her world was complete. The nursery was a symphony of soft blues and creams, filled with handcrafted toys and imported furniture. Marcus had been ecstatic, hosting lavish dinners to announce the heir to the Thorn Empire. He would often rest his hand on her belly, his eyes alight with a joy that seemed to mirror her own. "Our legacy, my love." He'd whisper, his voice thick with emotion. "Everything I do for you and for him." But lately, hairline cracks had begun to appear in the flawless facade of their life. Marcus was working later, his phone calls becoming more frequent and hushed. He'd attribute it to a new acquisition, a hostile takeover that required his undivided attention. Isabella, trusting and devoted, accepted his explanations. She'd wait for him, the chef-prepared meals growing cold on the polished mahogany table, her own reflection in the panoramic windows, her only company. The whispers started subtly, a shadow of a rumor caught in the clinking of champagne glasses at charity galas. A name, Camilla, was mentioned in hushed tones by women adorned in diamonds and envy. Isabella ignored them. The high society of Hanoi was a viper's nest of jealousy, and she, the ingenue who had captured its most eligible bachelor, was the prime target. Camilla, as Isabella would soon learn, was Camilla Tran, a ruthlessly ambitious socialite and a former flame of Marcus's from his university days. While Isabella exuded a quiet, cultured grace, Camilla was a firestorm. Her laughter was loud, her dresses were daring, and her ambition was an open secret. She had recently returned to Hanoi after a stint in Singapore, and her re-entry into their circle was as subtle as a lightning strike. The first time Isabella felt a genuine pang of unease was at the annual Vietnam Innovators Gala, held at the opulent St. Regis, Hanoi. Marcus, who was receiving the top award, was uncharacteristically distracted all evening. His eyes kept flitting towards the entrance, his grip on her hand just a fraction too tight. And then Camilla had arrived. She wore a crimson dress that clung to her like a second skin, a stark, audacious slash of color in a sea of elegant pastels and classic blacks. She moved through the crowd with the predatory grace of a panther, her gaze locking onto Marcus across the ballroom. Isabella saw the flicker of something in her husband's eyes, not just recognition, but something deeper, more complicated. A ghost of a memory, a shared history that excluded her. Throughout the night she watched as Camilla artfully cornered Marcus, her hand lingering on his arm, her laughter echoing a little too loudly in their conversations. Marcus, for his part, seemed flustered, a state so alien to his usual composed demeanor that it set Isabella's nerves on edge. "She's just an old friend, darling," he had reassured her later that night, his voice smooth as silk. A bit intense, but harmless. He had pulled her into his arms, his lips finding hers, and for a moment the warmth of his embrace melted her fears. She wanted to believe him. To doubt Marcus was to doubt the very foundation of her world. But the seeds of doubt had been planted. A week later, a receipt for a lavish bouquet of black roses, a flower Isabella detested but knew was Camilla's favorite, fell out of his briefcase. He'd brushed it off as a corporate gift. Then there was the late-night text that buzzed on his phone, a simple "thinking of you" from a number he quickly deleted. The excuses became more elaborate, the distance between them growing from a hairline crack to a chasm. Isabella felt a profound and suffocating loneliness. The sprawling penthouse, once a symbol of her fairy tale life, now felt like a gilded cage. Her friends, mostly wives of Marcus's business associates, offered sympathetic but ultimately hollow words. They were part of this world, they understood its unspoken rules. the silent accommodations, the turning of a blind eye. But Isabella's heart, pure and perhaps a little naive, couldn't accept that. Love to her was not a transaction or an arrangement. It was a sacred, all-consuming truth. The pregnancy, once her greatest joy, now became a source of anxiety. She felt a desperate need to protect her unborn son, not just from the world, but from the encroaching shadows in her own home. She tried to talk to Marcus to break through the wall he was meticulously building around himself. "Is everything all right, Marcus?" she asked one evening, her hand on his arm, as he stared out at the city lights. "You seem so far away." He turned his face a carefully constructed mask of affection. "Just stress, my love. This deal is draining. Once it's over, it'll be just the three of us. I promise." He tilted her chin up and kissed her, a perfunctory gesture that no longer reached his eyes. Isabella knew with a certainty that chilled her to the bone that he was lying. The deal wasn't about business. The hostile takeover was happening right under her roof, and the enemy was not a rival corporation, but a woman in a crimson dress who smelled of black roses and broken promises. The fairy tale was over. Isabella was trapped, pregnant, and alone, standing on the precipice of a devastating truth, with no idea just how brutal the revelation would be. The breaking point arrived with an embossed cream-colored invitation. The Thorn Corporation was celebrating its 50th anniversary with a grand ball. It was to be the social event of the season, a testament to the family's enduring legacy and power. For Isabella, it felt less like a celebration and more like a stage for the final act of her disintegrating marriage. In the weeks leading up to the event, Marcus was a whirlwind of activity, but his focus was sharp, his mood almost buoyant. He presented Isabella with a stunning midnight blue gown by a Parisian couturier and a sapphire necklace that mirrored the depths of West Lake. "You will be the most beautiful woman there," he said, his voice brimming with a sincerity she hadn't heard in months. "The mother of my son, the queen of my heart." For a fleeting, hopeful moment, Isabella allowed herself to believe him. Perhaps the affair, the whispers, the lies had been a fleeting madness. Perhaps this night was his way of reaffirming their bond, of showing the world, and her, that she was the one who truly mattered. She pushed her anxieties down, focusing on the baby's gentle kicks, a secret language of reassurance between mother and child. The night of the ball, the ballroom of the St. Regis Hanoi, was transformed into an enchanted forest from a Vietnamese folk tale. Thousands of orchids cascaded from the ceilings, and the air was thick with the scent of jasmine and the low hum of high-powered conversations. Isabella, on Marcus's arm, was a vision of serene elegance. The deep blue of her gown complemented her pregnancy, and the thorn sapphires at her throat glittered with every turn of her head. She smiled. She mingled. She played the part of the perfect billionaire's wife, all while a cold knot of dread tightened in her stomach. She knew Camilla would be there. It was inevitable. And sure enough, she saw her holding court by the champagne fountain, not in her usual audacious red, but in a startlingly white, almost bridal gown. The dress was a deliberate, provocative choice, an open challenge. Camilla's eyes found Isabella's across the room, and she offered a slow, deliberate smile that was anything but friendly. Marcus stiffened beside her. "Ignore her," he murmured, his grip on her elbow becoming possessive. "Tonight is about us." But Camilla had no intention of being ignored. As the night wore on, she seemed to be everywhere Isabella was. If Isabella moved to the terrace for a breath of fresh air, Camilla would appear moments later, her laughter sharp and piercing. If Isabella paused to speak with an acquaintance, Camilla would glide past her perfume, the cloying scent of black roses leaving a toxic trail. It was a calculated campaign of psychological warfare, and it was working. Isabella's composure began to fray. The climax came just after the main speeches. Marcus had just delivered a moving tribute to his family and the future of his company, concluding with a toast to my beautiful wife Isabella and our son, who will one day lead this legacy. The room erupted in applause. Beaming Marcus turned to kiss her, a public display of affection designed to cement their image as the perfect couple. It was in that moment of manufactured bliss that Camilla made her move. She strode towards their central table, her white dress parting the sea of guests like the prow of a ship. There was no hesitation in her steps, no doubt in her eyes. The murmuring of the crowd died down as she approached a collective intake of breath, creating a vacuum of silence in the grand ballroom. She stopped directly in front of Isabella, who was still seated. Marcus, caught off guard, stood halfway, his smile frozen on his face. Legacy. Camilla's voice was clear and cold, slicing through the silence. Your son. She laughed, a short, sharp, ugly sound. Marcus, you are a wonderful storyteller, but you seem to have forgotten the main character. She turned her venomous gaze on Isabella. You poor, pathetic little thing. Did you really believe all of it? The love story. The happy family. Isabella, stunned into silence, could only stare up at her. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. What are you talking about? She whispered, her voice barely audible. What am I talking about? Camilla's voice rose, theatrical and cruel. I'm talking about the fact that the child you are carrying is not the only Thorn heir. I'm talking about the fact that Marcus has been with me in my bed every night he told you he was working late. Gasps rippled through the room. People were now openly staring, their phones discreetly raised to capture the unfolding drama. Marcus finally found his voice. Camilla, that's enough. You're making a scene. I'm making a scene. She shrieked, her composure finally cracking to reveal the raw fury beneath. You're the one who has been living a lie. You promised me, Marcus. You promised you would leave her. She then looked back at Isabella, her eyes filled with a terrifying mix of pity and contempt. He was never going to leave me. This, she gestured at Isabella's belly, was just a little complication, an air for the public. But his heart, his passion, that belongs to me. Isabella felt the world tilt on its axis. The faces of the guests blurred into a grotesque gallery of gawking masks. She looked at Marcus silently, pleading with him to deny it, to say something to defend her. But he stood there, his face pale, his eyes darting between the two women, a trapped animal. His silence was the only confession she needed. Tears welled in Isabella's eyes, hot and shameful. She felt a protective instinct surge through her, a primal need to shield her son from this ugliness. She tried to stand to escape the suffocating scrutiny. Please, stop, she managed to say. But Camilla was not finished. She saw the tears, the vulnerability, and she went in for the kill. You think you've won? You think this baby solidifies your position? You are nothing but an incubator, a vessel. And then with a movement so swift it seemed to surprise even herself, Camilla leaned forward and swung her arm. Crack! The sound was sharp and shockingly loud in the silent room. Isabella's head snapped to the side, the force of the blow sending a jolt through her entire body. A collective, horrified gasp erupted from the onlookers. For a moment, there was only the stinging heat on her cheek and the stunned realization of what had just happened. Camilla the Mistress had slapped the pregnant wife of Marcus Thorne in front of everyone. Isabella stumbled back, her hand flying to her cheek, but her other arm wrapped instinctively, desperately around her stomach. The humiliation was a physical blow, a crushing weight that stole the air from her lungs. She looked at the faces around her. The shock, the pity, the morbid curiosity. She looked at Marcus, whose face was a canvas of horror and indecision. And then she looked at Camilla, who stood there, her chest heaving, her hand still tingling, a triumphant, hateful glare in her eyes. The fairy tale had not just ended. It had been violently, publicly, and irrevocably shattered, and as a sharp, cramping pain shot through her abdomen, Isabella realized the slap was not the most painful blow she would receive that night. The real agony was just beginning. The slap echoed in the cavernous ballroom, a definitive, brutal end to the night's festivities. The immediate aftermath was a chaotic tableau of shock and confusion. For a heartbeat, everyone, including Marcus, seemed frozen. Then the world lurched back into motion. Isabella, her mind reeling from the dual assault of humiliation and physical pain, felt her knees buckle. The sharp cramp in her lower abdomen intensified, radiating outwards in a wave of pure agony. A small, involuntary pruos escaped her lips. "My baby," she whispered, her voice choked with terror. Her protective instinct overrode everything else. The shame, the anger, the betrayal. All that mattered was the tiny, precious life inside her. It was not her husband who caught her. It was his father, Arthur Thorne, the family patriarch, who had been watching from a nearby table with an expression of grim fury. He surged forward, his old but still powerful frame moving with surprising speed, catching Isabella's arm just as she was about to collapse. "Get her a chair! Someone call a doctor!" he bellowed, his voice accustomed to commanding boardrooms, cutting through the stunned murmurs of the crowd. Marcus finally snapped out of his paralysis. "Isabella." He rushed to her side, his face a mess of panic and guilt. "My God, are you all right?" He reached for her, but she flinched away, her eyes filled with more pain than he had ever seen meeting his. In that single searing glance, he saw the complete and utter destruction of her trust in him. Camilla, meanwhile, seemed to realize the enormity of her actions. The triumphant fire in her eyes flickered, replaced by a flicker of panic. Assaulting anyone in this public manner was scandalous. Striking a pregnant woman was a cardinal sin, even in the morally flexible world of the super-rich. She took a half-step back, her gaze darting towards the exits. She had intended to cause a scene to force Marcus's hand, but this was spiraling out of control. I didn't mean," she began, but her words were cut off by Arthur Thorne's glacial stare. "You," he said, his voice low and lethally soft, "will not move an inch." Security. Two imposing men in dark suits materialized at his side. "Escort Ms. Tran to a private room and do not let her leave." Camilla's face paled. She opened her mouth to protest, but one look at the unyielding fury in Arthur's eyes silenced her. Without another word, the guards flanked her and guided her away, her white dress now looking less like a bridal gown and more like a shroud. All focus was now on Isabella. She was gasping, her breaths coming in shallow, ragged pants. The cramping was getting worse. "It hurts," she cried, clutching her belly as if she could physically hold her son in place. "Marcus, it hurts." Despite her flinching away, her fear-driven instinct was to call out to the man she still on some level saw as her protector. Marcus, his face ashen, knelt before her. "I'm here, Isabella. I'm so sorry. We'll get you to the hospital." He tried to take her hand, and this time she let him, her fingers gripping his with a desperate strength. The St. Regis staff, trained for any contingency, moved with quiet efficiency. A makeshift screen was erected around the table, affording the Thorns a sliver of privacy from the hundreds of prying eyes. A medic who was on standby for the event was at Isabella's side, in moments taking her pulse, his face grim. "Her blood pressure is dangerously high. She's cramping. We need to get her to a hospital immediately." "The FV hospital is the closest with a top-tier maternity ward," the medic announced, referring to the well-regarded Franco-Vietnamese hospital in Ho Chi Minh City, which had a prestigious branch in Hanoi. The logistics of the escape were a blur to Isabella. She was vaguely aware of being transferred to a wheelchair, of being wheeled through service corridors and down a private elevator away from the whispers and the stairs. The journey was a torment of pain and fear. Every bump in the road sent a fresh wave of agony through her. She kept her eyes squeezed shut, her hand never leaving her belly, whispering her son's name, a mantra against the encroaching darkness. Marcus sat beside her in the back of his Maybach, a silent, tormented figure. The mask of the powerful CEO was gone, replaced by the raw fear of a man watching his world crumble due to his own weakness. He kept murmuring apologies, a litany of, "I'm sorry, Isabella. I never wanted this. Please be okay." Isabella didn't respond. His words were meaningless static, the buzzing of a fly in a hurricane. The man whose promises had built her world had just stood by and watched it be demolished. His apologies were not for her. They were for himself. They were the desperate pleas of a guilty man, trying to absolve himself, and she had no comfort to offer him. She felt a terrifying wetness between her legs, and a fresh surge of panic rose in her throat. "Something's wrong," she gasped, her eyes flying open and locking with his. "Marcus, something is wrong with the baby." The terror in her voice finally seemed to penetrate his self-pity. He barked at his driver. "Faster. For God's sake, drive faster." As the limousine sped through the glittering, indifferent streets of Hanoi, leaving the scene of her humiliation far behind, Isabella felt a strange and chilling calm settle over her. The physical pain was immense, but it was the emotional agony that was truly defining. The slap had been a catalyst, a violent act that had shattered the gilded cage. But what echoed in its wake was not just the sound of a hand hitting skin, but the deafening silence of her husband's betrayal. It was the echo of a lie she had been living, a lie that was now threatening to cost her the only thing that mattered. She was no longer just fighting for her marriage or her dignity. She was fighting for her son's life. The emergency entrance of the FV hospital was a blur of harsh fluorescent lights and urgent controlled chaos. A team was waiting, alerted by Arthur Thorne's influential call. Isabella was swiftly transferred from the wheelchair to a gurney, the transition jarring her body and eliciting another cry of pain. Doctors and nurses swarmed around her, their voices a calm but urgent flurry of medical terminology. Pregnant, 26 weeks, presenting with severe abdominal cramping and signs of bleeding following a physical altercation. BP, is 160/100. Tachycardic. Get her to the maternity ward, stat prep for an ultrasound. We need to check for placental abruption. Marcus was shunted to the side, rendered powerless and irrelevant by the medical professionals who now held his wife's and child's lives in their hands. He stood in the corridor, his tuxedo looking absurdly out of place, his hands stained with a small amount of Isabella's blood where he had tried to comfort her. He watched as they wheeled her away, her hand still protectively on her belly, her face pale and etched with fear. The doors swung shut behind her, leaving him alone with the crushing weight of his guilt. Inside the examination room, the atmosphere was tense. Isabella was gently helped into a hospital gown, her beautiful midnight blue dress unceremoniously cut away. The pain was a constant, terrifying rhythm. A kind-faced, middle-aged female doctor, Dr. Lien, introduced herself as the head of obstetrics. Isabella. My name is Dr. Lien. We're going to take very good care of you and your baby, she said, her voice a beacon of calm in the storm. We need to do an ultrasound to see what's happening. I need you to try and stay as still as possible. Isabella nodded, tears streaming silently down her temples. Is my baby going to be okay? We're doing everything we can to ensure that Dr. Lien said, her reassuring tone never wavering, though her eyes betrayed the seriousness of the situation. Let's have a look. The room fell silent as the ultrasound technician applied the cold gel to Isabella's stomach. All that could be heard was the soft whirring of the machine and Isabella's ragged breathing. She stared at the monitor, her heart pounding in her ears, praying for a sign, for a flicker of hope. The technician moved the transducer across her abdomen, the grey and black images swirling on the screen. Dr. Lien's eyes were narrowed in concentration, her brow furrowed. Marcus, who had finally been allowed in, after an agonizing wait, stood in the corner, looking on helplessly. There's the baby, Dr. Lien said softly. He's small, but he's a fighter. Isabella let out a choked sob of relief. He was alive. But I am seeing some cause for concern. The doctor continued, her tone becoming more clinical. There appears to be a small subchorionic hematoma, likely caused by the trauma and the spike in your blood pressure. It's a bleed. That's what's causing the pain and the spotting. We need to monitor it very closely. But he'll be okay. Marcus's voice was hoarse from the sidelines. Dr. Lien didn't look at him. Her focus was entirely on her patient. The immediate danger is preterm labor. The stress and physical shock could trigger contractions. We're going to give you medication to stop them, and a steroid shot to help the baby's lungs develop, just in case. As she spoke, the technician adjusted a setting on the machine, and a new sound filled the room. Thump, 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 thump. It was the sound of the baby's heartbeat, amplified by the machine. It was fast, a frantic, galloping rhythm, but it was strong. It was the most beautiful sound Isabella had ever heard. Tears of relief streamed down her face. It was the sound of life, of hope. Dr. Lien smiled for the first time. A strong heartbeat. That's a very good sign. A little fast, he's clearly stressed, but strong. Marcus stepped forward, a wave of relief washing over his face. Thank God, he breathed. The technician continued her work, taking measurements, capturing stills of the tiny profile, the little fists. Dr. Lien was explaining the course of treatment, complete bed rest, constant monitoring, when the technician suddenly paused. She zoomed in on one particular area of the screen, her own brow furrowing in a way that had nothing to do with the hematoma. Doctor, she said quietly, pointing to the screen. "Could you look at this?" Dr. Lyon leaned in, her professional gaze sweeping over the area the technician indicated. The room fell silent again, the baby's amplified heartbeat the only sound. For a long moment, Dr. Lyon said nothing. She simply stared at the image, her expression shifting from professional concern to one of utter bewilderment. "What is it?" Isabella asked, a fresh spike of fear piercing her relief. "Is something else wrong?" Dr. Lyon turned from the monitor and looked at Isabella, then at Marcus, and then back to Isabella. Her face was a complex mask of confusion and something else, something that looked like disbelief. "Run the Doppler again," she instructed the technician. "Amplify it." The technician complied. The thump-thump sound filled the room once more. But this time the technician moved the transducer just a few centimeters, and then another sound joined the first. Thump-thump, 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 thump-thump. It was a second heartbeat. Distinct, separate, yet beating in an almost identical frantic rhythm. It was unmistakable. The room, which had been filled with one frantic heartbeat, was now filled with the sound of two. Isabella stared at the screen, then at the doctor, her mind unable to process the sound. "What is that?" Marcus stepped closer to the screen, his eyes wide with confusion. "Is that an echo? What's wrong with the machine?" Dr. Lyon slowly shook her head, her eyes still locked on the monitor, where two tiny, flickering forms were now visible. She looked up at Isabella, her voice barely a whisper. "Mr. Thorne, there is nothing wrong with the machine." She took a deep breath, as if steeling herself to announce something utterly impossible. "Isabella, you're not carrying one baby." She pointed a trembling finger at the screen, at the two distinct sacs, at the two tiny, flickering hearts, beating in terrified unison. "You're having twins." The revelation hung in the air, a fact so stunning, so completely unexpected, that it defied all logic. All the previous scans conducted by a top society doctor, chosen by Marcus, had shown only one baby. One boy. The heir. Marcus had been there every time, beaming as he looked at the grainy image of his son. A wave of dizziness washed over Isabella. Twins. How was that possible? They had done scans at 8 weeks, 12 weeks, and the detailed anatomy scan at 20 weeks. All had shown one baby, a single, healthy boy. Then a darker, more insidious thought began to form in the recesses of her mind, born from the night's catastrophic betrayals. She looked at Marcus, whose face was not filled with the joy of an unexpected blessing, but with a ghostly pallor of pure, unadulterated shock. His expression was not one of confusion. It was the look of a man whose carefully constructed lie had just been blown apart by the most undeniable, most irrefutable truth of all. The society doctor, the man he had chosen, the insistence on it being a boy, the unwavering certainty. But all the other scans, she began, her voice trembling as the horrifying implication began to dawn on her. Dr. Pham always said, he said it was just one. Marcus couldn't meet her gaze. He stared at the screen at the two heartbeats that had just exposed him, his mind clearly racing, searching for an escape that didn't exist. And in that moment, Isabella understood. The slap, the affair, the public humiliation that was just the prelude. This was the true betrayal. It wasn't just a simple case of infidelity. It was a deception so profound, so calculated that it had targeted the most sacred space in her life, her own body, her own children. Dr. Lyon, sensing the monumental shift in the room, spoke gently. Sometimes a twin can be hidden, tucked behind the other, especially if the sonographer isn't specifically looking. But at 26 weeks, it's unusual to miss. Very unusual. Her carefully chosen words hung in the air, a quiet indictment. The two heartbeats continued their frantic rhythmic drumming, a sound that was no longer just a sign of life, but a declaration of war. They were the beat of a truth that could not be silenced, a truth that revealed that Marcus Thorne had not just lied about his mistress. He had lied about the very nature of the legacy he claimed to cherish. Isabella was not just carrying his heir. She was carrying a secret he had desperately, and for reasons she couldn't yet fathom, tried to conceal. And now, thanks to the violent act of his mistress, that secret was out. Everything had changed. The revelation of the second heartbeat did not bring joy. It detonated in the sterile hospital room like a silent, devastating bomb, obliterating the last vestiges of Isabella's shattered reality. The sound of the two tiny hearts beating in unison was a testament not to a miracle, but to a monstrous, calculated deception. Isabella lay on the hospital bed, the doctor's words echoing in her ears. "You're having twins." She looked at Marcus, truly looked at him for the first time since the news broke. The panic on his face was undeniable, but it was laced with something else, the cold, hard glint of a man cornered. It was the look of a king whose carefully constructed kingdom had just been set ablaze. You knew she whispered, her voice devoid of tears, stripped bare to a chilling monotone. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact, a verdict. You knew, and you lied. Marcus flinched, as if she had slapped him. "Isabella, no, how could I have known? It's a surprise, a blessing." His attempt at feigned delight was pathetic, a transparently false performance that was an insult to her intelligence. "A blessing." Her voice rose, laced with a hysterical edge. "You stood there at every appointment with Dr. Pham, your hand-picked physician, looking at the screen and telling me about our son, the Thorne heir. Was he in on it too? Did you pay him to lie, to erase one of our children from existence?" The accusation hung in the air, ugly and undeniable. Dr. Lyon and the technician suddenly became very busy averting their eyes, offering the illusion of privacy, where none existed. "That's a crazy accusation," Marcus stammered, running a hand through his perfectly styled hair, messing it for the first time all night. "Why would I do that? Why would I hide one of my own children?" "I don't know." Isabella's voice cracked, the raw pain finally breaking through her shock. "Maybe one was a boy, and one was a girl, and you only wanted the boy. Maybe you have some sick, twisted reason. I can't even begin to imagine." But you knew. Your shock wasn't surprise, Marcus. It was the terror of being caught. The two heartbeats, still thumping steadily from the monitor, served as a relentless rhythmic jury. Thump, thump. Thump, thump. Guilty. Guilty. Before Marcus could formulate another lie, the door opened and his father, Arthur Thorne, swept in. The patriarch's face was a thundercloud of controlled rage. He had clearly been briefed. He took in the scene. Isabella pale and trembling with fury on the bed, Marcus cornered and sweating, the damning image still frozen on the ultrasound screen. Arthur's gaze fell on his son, and the disappointment in his eyes was so profound, it was almost a physical force. "I have just had a very enlightening conversation with the hospital administrator," he said, his voice dangerously calm. "And I took the liberty of placing a call to your Dr. Pham. A very nervous man, Dr. Pham. It seems his records from your last scan have been misplaced." Marcus visibly paled. The unspoken threat was clear. The Thorne family's reach was long, and a doctor who participated in such a fraud would have his career destroyed. "Father, this is a misunderstanding." Marcus began, his voice pleading. "Silence," Arthur commanded, and Marcus, for all his billions and his power, obeyed like a chastened child. Arthur walked to Isabella's bedside. His expression softened as he looked at her, a flicker of genuine compassion in his hardened eyes. "Isabella," he said gently, "I am profoundly sorry for the humiliation you suffered tonight, and for this unforgivable deception. Whatever my son has done, the Thorne family will not abandon you or your children." He glanced at the monitor, a flicker of wonder crossing his face at the sight of the two distinct forms, two potential heirs. He then turned his full attention back to Marcus, his voice dropping to a low growl. "You will tell me why. You will tell me why you would deny your own blood. Now." Trapped between his furious father and his devastated wife, Marcus finally broke. The lies, the bravado, the carefully maintained facade, it all crumbled. He slumped into the chair in the corner, his head in his hands. "It was complicated," he mumbled. "Complicated does not suffice when you are lying to your wife about the existence of your child," Arthur thundered. Marcus looked up, his face a mask of desperation. "It was Camilla," he said, his voice barely a whisper. She's pregnant too." The air was sucked out of the room. Isabella felt a fresh wave of nausea so intense she thought she would be sick. It was a betrayal on a scale she could never have conceived. "I found out a few months ago," Marcus continued the confession, tumbling out of him in a torrent of self-pitying misery. "She claimed it was mine. She threatened to go public to ruin everything. The anniversary, the launch of the new subsidiary. The timing was a disaster. She wanted me to leave you to marry her. She was obsessed. And your solution was to lie to everyone," Arthur demanded. "I was buying time," Marcus insisted, standing up, pacing like a caged animal. "I didn't know if her baby was even mine. I told her I'd handle it. My plan, my stupid, idiotic plan, was to secure the legitimate heir. Our son." He looked at Isabella. "I needed to establish his primacy. A single male heir. It was clean, powerful. It would cement our family line and make Camilla's claim if she made it seem like a desperate, pathetic ploy from a scorned mistress." The chilling logic of his plan began to dawn on Isabella. And a second baby, a twin. Complicated, that she said, her voice hollow. "It muddied the waters," he exclaimed, almost angry that she was making him admit it. 2 babies. It made it seem messy, less definitive. And what if one was a girl? It would weaken my position. I told Pham to just focus on the boy, to omit the other one from the official reports, just for a little while. I was going to reveal the surprise twin later after Camilla's situation was neutralized. I swear it, Isabella. I would never have denied our child forever. It was a temporary strategic deception. A strategic deception. Isabella repeated the words, tasting their poison. You erased our child from our lives for strategy. You made me believe I was only carrying one baby, grieving a loss. I didn't even know I had all to manage your sordid affair. The sheer cold-blooded calculus of it was breathtaking. He had weighed his children on a scale of public relations and corporate strategy and found one of them wanting. He hadn't just cheated on her, he had played God with their unborn children. Arthur Thorne looked at his son with utter contempt. "You are a fool, Marcus, a weak, short-sighted fool. You have taken a crisis and turned it into a cataclysm. You have dishonored your wife, your name, and your own unborn children, all to appease a venomous viper you were too weak to discard." He turned back to Isabella, his decision made. "Isabella, you will want for nothing. The full resources of the Thorne family are at your disposal. You and your children will be protected. As for you, Marcus," he said, his voice dropping to absolute zero, "you are relieved of all your duties at Thorne Corporation, effective immediately. Your assets are frozen. You will go to the country house, and you will not leave until I summon you. You have made your bed of lies. Now you will lie in it. Alone." The verdict was absolute. In the space of a few hours, Marcus Thorne had gone from the king of Hanoi's business world to a dethroned, disgraced exile. He stared at his father, then at his wife, his mouth opening and closing with no sound coming out. There was nothing left to say. His lies had unraveled, and in doing so had unraveled him completely. Isabella watched him, feeling not a shred of pity, only a vast, empty coldness where her love used to be. The man she had married was a stranger, a moral void hidden behind a handsome face and a charming smile. The trauma of the night, the slap the terror had forged something new inside her. The meek, trusting art curator was gone. In her place was a mother of two, a woman who had been pushed to the absolute limit and had found not an abyss, but a core of steel. The 2 heartbeats on the monitor continued their steady, strong rhythm. They were the only truth left in the room. They were her truth, and she would protect them and herself with a ferocity that Marcus and his mistress could not possibly comprehend. The war was just beginning. The week that followed was a cocoon of enforced tranquility and simmering rage. Isabella remained at the FV hospital, not just for medical reasons, but for sanctuary. Her suite was transformed into a command center, a fortress from which she would plan her counter-offensive. The hematoma was stable, the risk of preterm labor had subsided, and the 2 tiny heartbeats that had upended her world grew stronger each day. They were her fuel, her purpose. Arthur Thorne was true to his word. He visited daily, not with the overbearing authority of a patriarch, but with the quiet deference of an ally. He saw in Isabella not a fragile victim, but the future matriarch of his legacy, the guardian of not 1 but 2 of his grandchildren. He provided her with the best legal team in Vietnam, a group of sharp, merciless lawyers who specialized in high-stakes divorces. "Spare no expense," Arthur had told them in Isabella's presence. "I want this handled with the subtlety of a guillotine, clean, final, and entirely in Ms. Isabella's favor." Marcus was gone, banished to a remote Thorne estate in the highlands of Dalat. His name was scrubbed from the corporate website his office cleared out. The official story, meticulously crafted by Arthur's PR team, was that Marcus had stepped down for personal health reasons to focus on his family during a difficult pregnancy. The story was just plausible enough to quell the rampant speculation. But the real story, the one whispered in the boardrooms and elite social circles, was that the king had been ruthlessly deposed. Camilla Tran was also dealt with. Arthur's investigators had worked with surgical precision. They uncovered her own web of debts and deceit. The pregnancy she claimed, it was real. But a discreetly obtained DNA test from a coffee cup she'd used at a cafe proved what Arthur had suspected: the baby wasn't Marcus's. It belonged to a married Singaporean businessman she had been seeing concurrently. Armed with this proof, Arthur's lawyers presented her with a simple, non-negotiable choice: disappear quietly with a modest one-time settlement and a signed NDA, or face public exposure fraud charges and the unmitigated wrath of the Thorne family. Camilla, a pragmatist above all else, took the deal and vanished from the Hanoi social scene as quickly as she had appeared. But for Isabella, these victories were peripheral. Her focus was singular. It wasn't about revenge on Camilla, or even about punishing Marcus anymore. It was about reclaiming her narrative and securing an unassailable future for her children. During her days in the hospital, she began to change. The soft, deferential woman who had once organized art exhibitions was replaced by a shrewd, calculating strategist. She devoured the financial reports her lawyers brought her, learning about trust funds, share allocations, and corporate governance. She had once loved Marcus for his charm and ambition. Now she studied the architecture of the empire he had built, not with admiration, but with the critical eye of a conqueror. Her gambit, when she finally revealed it to her lawyers and a stunned but impressed Arthur Thorne, was audacious. "I don't want a simple divorce settlement," she announced one afternoon, her voice clear and steady. The hospital suite was bathed in the soft afternoon light, and she was propped up in bed, surrounded by financial documents, looking more like a CEO than a patient. "I don't want cash or property or alimony." Her lead lawyer, a formidable woman named Ms. Vi, raised an eyebrow. "Ms. Isabella, given the circumstances, the infidelity, the public assault, the staggering fraud regarding the children, you are entitled to one of the largest settlements in this country's history." "A settlement makes me a pensioner of the Thorne family," Isabella stated calmly. "It makes me a wealthy victim. I have no interest in being a victim." She looked directly at Arthur. "Marcus's shares in Thorne Corporation, his voting rights, his seat on the board. I want them transferred to a trust that I control as the sole trustee for the benefit of my children." Arthur stared at her, his expression unreadable. Ms. Vi's jaw practically dropped. Isabella was not asking for a piece of the pie. She was demanding control of the bakery. "He will never agree to that," Ms. Vi said. "That's his identity, his life's work." "He will agree," Isabella said with chilling certainty. "Because the alternative is that I don't sign a non-disclosure agreement. The alternative is that I give a full exclusive interview to the Wall Street Journal. I will tell them everything about the affair, about the public assault by his mistress, and about the meticulous, medically assisted fraud he perpetrated to hide the existence of one of his own children for strategic gain." She let the threat hang in the air. It was mutually assured destruction. The scandal would not just destroy Marcus's reputation permanently. It would taint the Thorne Corporation name for a generation. It would cause shareholder panic, invite regulatory scrutiny, and become a legendary case study in corporate malfeasance and moral bankruptcy. I will detail how Dr. Pham was pressured to falsify medical records. She continued, her eyes locked on Arthur. I will explain that my husband's immediate reaction to discovering he was having twins was not joy, but terror at his lie being exposed. I will paint a picture of a man and a corporate culture so obsessed with a clean, powerful narrative of a single male heir that it was willing to deny a child's very existence. Arthur remained silent, his steepled fingers covering his mouth. He was a ruthless businessman, and he recognized the move for what it was, a brilliant, perfectly executed checkmate. Isabella had found his single greatest weakness, his obsession with the family legacy. She was using the sanctity of that legacy which Marcus had so carelessly desecrated as her ultimate weapon. She wasn't threatening to take his money. She was threatening to burn his kingdom to the ground. Finally, he spoke, a slow smile spreading across his face. It was a smile of pure, unadulterated respect. "He'll sign, Arthur," said, nodding to Miss Vi. "Draw up the papers." The meeting with Marcus was arranged a week later, after Isabella was discharged and settled into a new, secure penthouse, one chosen and paid for by her from an advance on the trust. The location was neutral, a private conference room at the Sofitel Legend Metropole, Hanoi, a place of old-world power. Isabella walked in, not as a victim, but as an equal. She was no longer pregnant and hiding behind flowing dresses. She had given birth 2 days prior to 2 small but healthy babies, a boy, Leo, and a girl, Luna. The birth had been premature but uncomplicated. Her body was tired, but her spirit was forged in iron. Marcus was already there, flanked by his own lawyer. He looked diminished, a ghost of his former self. The tailored suit hung loosely on his frame, and the arrogance in his eyes was gone, replaced by a weary resignation. He hadn't seen Isabella or his children since the night at the hospital. He stood when she entered. "Isabella, I heard about the babies. Are they—" "They are fine," she said, her voice cool and professional, cutting him off. She did not take the offered seat across from him, but remained standing, a silent assertion of power. "No thanks to you." She gestured for Ms. Vi to present the documents. Marcus's lawyer read through them, his eyes widening with each clause. He leaned over and whispered frantically to his client. Marcus just shook his head, a broken man. This is everything," he whispered, looking at Isabella. "My shares, my seat, my entire life." "You have a life," Isabella retorted, her voice sharp as glass. "You have one because I am choosing not to scorch the earth. I am choosing to protect the family name for the sake of my children. This is not a punishment, Marcus. It is a consequence. You proved you are not fit to be the steward of this legacy. So now I will be." She finally sat down, her gaze unwavering. "You will have supervised visitation rights. You will be provided with a generous allowance, enough to live comfortably, but not enough to cause trouble. You will, for all intents and purposes, retire from public life. In return, the world will remember you as the man who stepped down for his family. It's a better legacy than the one you were building. You should thank me." There was a long, heavy silence. Marcus looked at the documents, then at his ex-wife, the woman he had so grievously underestimated. He saw not the gentle girl he had married, but an empress in the making. He had created her, in a way. His betrayals had been the fire, and she had walked out of it, reborn, holding his entire world in her hands. With a trembling hand, Marcus Thorne, the deposed king, picked up the pen. He signed away his power, his company, and his future, all to the steady, silent rhythm of 2 tiny heartbeats he had once tried to erase. The Empress's gambit had succeeded, and so the story of the slap that shocked Hanoi's elite took its final, stunning turn. It was never just about a mistress's fury or a husband's infidelity. It was about a deception that ran to the very heart of a family, and the quiet, unassuming wife who rose from the ashes of public humiliation to seize control of an empire. Isabella Thorne, once a footnote in her husband's story, became the author of her own, rewriting her destiny. Not with tears, but with shrewd intelligence, and the unyielding power of a mother's love. She proved that the greatest strength is often forged in the deepest betrayal, and that sometimes the most powerful move is not to destroy your enemies, but to simply take everything they hold dear. What did you think of Isabella's ultimate power move? Was it justice or the most brilliant revenge? We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you were captivated by this story of drama betrayal and ultimate empowerment, please give this video a like and share it with someone who loves a story where the queen finally takes the throne. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you won't miss our next tale of secrets, lies, and stunning revelations. Thank you for watching.